Alright, let's go ahead and break down that command we just ran. So first off, I mentioned that we were running an image called nginx. Now, when we talk about images in the context of Docker, images serve as the basis for a Docker container. Think of them as blueprints for a building. We can use an image as a blueprint for creating a container. In this case, when we ran docker run -it-p nginx, nginx was our blueprint, and it created an instance of nginx in the form of a container, which is running right here. This is pretty handy because we can reuse this image to create multiple containers. Very handy if we need copies or if we need to perhaps scale up an application. Now let's go ahead and try some commands to just kind of play around with this whole idea of images. So first off, let's go ahead and quit out of this container. We can do Control-C, and it should quit out of that container, and we can verify that by going over here and refreshing a couple times. Now localhost 3000, connection refused. We can't access that web server because the container is stopped. So first off, let's go ahead and check out that nginx image. We're going to type the command docker images, and you'll see that we have a list of images here. Now you'll see that I have some other images such as Ruby, Node, a few others. Right here, this is the image that was pulled down. So we have nginx, the tag, which is the version, which in this case is the latest, the image ID, as well as when it was created, and the size. Now we'll see that it was created a couple months ago, it was a size, but also let's think about this. Where was this image pulled from? Where did it come from? So when we typed in nginx, automatically Docker is going to look on an image repository site called Docker Hub. And if it happens to find a match, it'll pull down that image in order for us to use automatically. So we have images in that command. We also have publishing a port. That's this -p 3000:80. Now, we talked about that very briefly when we last ran that command. But let's go ahead and play around with that idea of publishing a port. We talked about how this number 3000 is the port that's available external or outside the container. The number on the right is the port that's available inside the container. Now let's go ahead and play around with that a little bit. So assuming that nginx is running on port 80 inside of the container, let's try this. Go ahead and try docker run, and we're just going to kind of shorten this, -p 80:80 nginx. Now, if nginx is running on port 80 inside the container, and we say we're going to publish that to port 80 outside the container, if we go ahead and refresh over here, notice that localhost 3000 won't work, but since we said that we're going to publish to port 80 outside the container, if we go to localhost 80, boom, we should have an nginx server. Now notice that the 80 disappeared over here. That's because 80 is usually the default port that's exposed on a web server. Now if I go ahead and quit that, let's go ahead and change it up a little bit. Let's map to 5000. Now we'll see over here, just plain old localhost, which defaults to 80, isn't going to show up. But if we go to 5000, we'll see that we can access that web server just on a different port. That's because we're changing the left side. We're changing what port we're publishing on outside the container. And then lastly, let's go ahead and try changing port 80 to port 90. Now in this case, there is a command that's running inside the container that says, hey, nginx, run on port 80. But right now, we didn't change it. So in other words, we're running nginx on port 80 inside the container, but we're saying, oh hey, we're going to publish port 90 onto 5000. And you'll see over here that if we refresh, we'll get an empty response, meaning that it's making a request, but it can't find that web server because we mapped the wrong internal port. And lastly, let's go ahead and talk about running that particular command. So I'm going to go back to the original command, which was running nginx. We're going to publish port 80 onto 3000. And notice that when we ran that command, we were running that command and it kind of took over our terminal screen here. So I can go and access that web server. It'll print out some logs for me. But over here, like, I can type stuff and it doesn't really affect anything. In other words, this container is running in the foreground and it's taking up my my terminal emulator until I quit the container, like so. Now, you could open up another terminal window in order to get around this, but usually what you'll want to do is you'll want to run the container in the background. Now, you can go ahead and do this by going over here and providing another flag. That's the D flag. This is telling Docker to run the container in detached mode. So if I go ahead and try that, you'll see that it actually spits out something and then it gives me control in my terminal again. And what this is doing is it's running this container in the background. It's spitting out the container identifier, and then it's giving me control of my terminal window again. So now if I go over here and try accessing the web server, you'll see that it still works. It's just running in the background. Now if I want to see that particular container, I can see it by typing docker ps, and it'll give me a list of all of my running containers at this particular moment. So we're going to talk a little bit more about docker ps, as well as some other commands related to managing our containers.